السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. ثم المخالفة، وهي القسم السابع، إن كانت واقعة بسبب تغيير السياق أي سياق الإسناد، فالواقع فيه ذلك التغيير هو مدرج الإسناد، وهو أقسام. الأول أن يروي جماعة الحديث بأسانيد مختلفة فيرويه عنهم راو فيجمع الكل على إسناد واحد من تلك الأسانيد ولا يبين الاختلاف. الثاني أن يكون المتن عند راو إلا طرفا منه فإنه عنده بإسناد آخر فيرويه راو عنه تاما بالإسناد الأول. ومنه يسمع الحديث من شيخه إلا طرفا منه فيسمعه عن شيخه بواسطة فيرويه راو عنه تماما بحذف الواسطة. الثالث أن يكون عند الراوي متنان مختلفان بإسنادين مختلفين فيرويهما راو عنه مقتصرا على أحد الإسنادين، أو يروي أحد الحديثين بإسناده الخاص به لكن يزيد فيه من المتن الآخر ما ليس في الأول. الرابع يسوق الإسناد فيعرض له عارض فيقول كلاما من قبل نفسه فيظن بعض من سمعه أن ذلك الكلام هو متن ذلك الإسناد فيرويه عنه كذلك. هذه أقسام مدرج الإسناد. So here the author discusses the seventh point which impacts the integrity of a narrator. Remember, we're discussing the ta'nur rawi, those things which impacts the integrity of a narrator, and hence it has an impact on the narrations which he narrates. So this is where the narrator differs with others who narrate the same narration. ثم المخالفة وهي القسم السابع, where there is difference. So a narrator can differ in various different ways. Sometimes he can be making a clear error. If he does it often, then he would be placed in the third category. You can see here in the footnotes, Sheikh Nuruddin Itr rahimahullah says, فَإِذَا كَثُرَتْ مُخَالَفَاتُهُ ضُعِّفَ حَدِيثُهُ كُلُّهُ. If he has to differ a lot, then it will be like he done فَحُشَ غَلَطُهُ. So it will be that he made lots of mistakes. And if he has to make a lot of waham, that means many times it happens that he has to doubt when narrating, then also his narrations are regarded as weak. Likewise, when we done shaz was all about mukhalafa. Yes, mukhalafa to thiqat. So even munkar was about mukhalafa, where a weak person contradicts a reliable person. So you can see there are various types of mukhalafa, but here Sheikh Hafiz ibn Hajar rahmallah will be discussing a few other types of mukhalafa. So he starts first with mudraj, and thereafter he will mention maqlub, etc. So he will mention all these different, and then also mazid fi muttasil al-asanid, mukhalafa bi abdalihi, etc. So mustarib, he discusses all those kinds of mukhalafa. So the first type which he starts with is a mudraj. He says, إن كانت واقعة بسبب تغيير السياق سياق الإسناد فالواقع في ذلك التغيير هو مدرج الإسناد. That if it happens, how is the one narrator differing with the others? Because he is narrating it differently. So he is narrating the sanad differently compared to how the others are narrating it. Then it will be considered as a mudrajul isnad. So firstly, to go through the word mudraj, to study the word mudraj a little further, it is the ism maf'ul of idraj, and the literal meaning of idraj is to fold, to cover, laffu shay, so it means to cover. So when you fold something, then the one part actually touches the other part, isn't it? So if you take, like, for example, a towel, and if you have to fold it, then the one part of the towel touches the other part. So that meaning of folding and covering. Likewise, when you cover something, then the cloth or the wrapping, it touches the item which is being covered. So from here, the word also started to be used in the meaning of idkhal, but taking this touching and this closeness into consideration, the very accurate meaning of it is idkhalu shay fi shay على وجه المماسة والقرب مما يؤدي إلى الخفاء غالبا. It is where you incorporate one thing into another thing. You insert one thing into another thing in such a way that it's so close it actually touches. And once you inserted it, it maybe even could become totally concealed. So it basically entering something into a small gap that it actually touches the sides. And that is why you will find in the books of Lugha, they give the example of adrajtul kitaba fil raf, or adrajtul mayyit fil qabr, etc. So this here, Sheikh Abdul Karim Al-Khuzair in Tahqiq al-Rahba, he said that idraj is, the word mudraj is ism maf'ul min al-idraj. يقال رجت الشيء في الشيء إذا أدخلته فيه وضمنته إياه. But you cannot say that I put something into a big room, because then it's not touching. So you cannot say, for example, adrajtul kursi fi as-salah, that I put the chair into a hall, because the hall is huge. There is not touching. So you can see that it means when you're inserting something into a small gap, that is the meaning of idraj. And that is the precise meaning which is taken into consideration when looking at it here. So mudraj means that when one narration is incorporated into another narration in such a way that the listener assumes that it is all one narration, and it becomes very difficult to separate. So you can see it covers it, it folds it, like this one narration now becomes incorporated into the other narration. In this chapter here then also illustrates to us very clearly how strict and how meticulous the muhaddithun were to ensure that what they were terming as hadith, it had to be the words of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it could not be the words of any other person. They would clearly dissect the statement and make sure that any words, any foreign words, any alien words needs to be separated. Only the words of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so it also shows us the expertise and the competence of the muhaddithun. So because if these were scholars who were able to detect the exact words of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam when it was mixed up and when it was interpolated with the words of others, then you can well imagine how much easier it was for them to identify a total baseless forgery, which had no words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam at all. Because here, obviously, some words are that of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and some words are of another person, and they were able to dissect it and differentiate between the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the words of the other person. So if they could sift prophetic words from non-prophetic words when they were all in one text, then surely it would be very easy for them. That if the full text is only the words of someone else and not of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then it would be very easy for them to realize that that is not a hadith. So this here is a very important chapter because it keeps the statements of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam separate from the words of others. And narrators would incorporate, we'll see from the examples, even the most reliable of narrators at times would do it. They would do it for various reasons. Sometimes they would just want to be concise. Maybe they're mentioning it in a khutbah, or maybe they're mentioning it for istidlal. Maybe they're just mentioning the hadith in passing. So they're not mentioning it with the intention of a riwayah. So therefore they will, in the middle, put some additional words. At other times, maybe there's a difficult word, because obviously sometimes you know how particular words are confined to a particular region. Sometimes it's confined to a particular time. So maybe these words were no more used in that time, or maybe it was not used in those areas. So they just wanted to explain it in the famous example which comes right in the beginning of Bukhari. Then at other times they wanted to explain the entire narration, so therefore they would incorporate. And yes, we do admit that there were also times when it would be done by mistake and it would be done unintentionally. So that's all with regards you will find in the matan, but it also happens in the sanad a lot. And this is Ibn Hajar rahmallah commences with idraj in the sanad. Alama ibn Salah rahmallah first mentioned mudraj in the matan, and thereafter idraj as-sanad, but Ibn Hajar rahmallah felt it wise to mention it the other way around. So he first mentions Idrajul Isnad and or Mudrajul Isnad, and thereafter he will mention Mudrajul Matn. So he says that Idrajul Isnad is divided into 4 types. Basically, 4 types is what they found out from, this is the reality, that after doing a detailed research and examining various ways in which Idraj took place in the Sanad, they found these 4 types happen quite common. Otherwise, فَهُوَ لَا يَنْحَسِرُ عَقْلًا فِيهَا. You can, if you have to really just go by a logical way of showing how Idraj can happen in the Sanad, then you can make it into so many thousands and countless of different ways. If he adds a person above him, you can call it a different thing. If he adds 2 narrators above, then you can call it something else. If it's 3 narrators above, then you can call it something else, etc. So it is so many different names, or so many different types which it could be divided in. فَانْحِصَارُهُ فِيهَا اسْتِقْرَائِهِ. But these 4 types are how it commonly would happen. So Mudrajul Isnad is 4 types and Mudrajul Matn is 3 types. So he mentions that al-awwal, now mentioning the 4 types, that يَرْوِيَ جَمَاعَةٌ الْأَحَادِيثِ بِأَسَانِيدَ مُخْتَلِفَةٍ. So here a person hears the narration from various different teachers, and they all narrate it with variations in the chain. So they are narrating with the exact same sanad. That means, say it's 5 narrators in the sanad. Maybe 4 of those narrators are the same, but most importantly, it goes back to the same sahabi. So it's the exact same sanad they are narrating. But then some would add a narrator, and others would not mention that narrator in the middle. So this is the first type in which Idraj will take place. That you have a sanad. So one sanad basic is the exact same sanad, the exact same sheikh and his sheikh, etc., and goes back to the exact same sahabi from the Prophet ﷺ. But one has 5 narrators and one only has 4 narrators. But when narrating it, he does from all of these different teachers of his, some who narrated it with that additional narrator, and others who did not narrate it with that additional narrator. He does not make any distinction, and he makes it seem as if they all quoted the sanad in the same way. وَحَاسِلُهُ أَن يَسْمَعَ الرَّاوِي حَدِيثًا عَنْ جَمَاعَةٍ مُخْتَلِفِينَ فِي إِسْنَادِهِ وَيَرْوِيهِ عَنْهُمْ بِاتِّفَاقٍ وَلَمْ يُبَيِّنِ الْإِخْتِلَافِ. That he makes it seem as if they all narrated it to him in the same way, with quoting that exact same sanad, and he doesn't mention the ikhtilaf. So a person, he went and he heard this from say 4 people. 3 people narrated it, and between them and the Prophet ﷺ there were 5 narrators. This one teacher of his narrated it, and between him and the Prophet ﷺ the exact same sanad, but he left out the name of one narrator, so it's only now 4. When he narrates it, he takes the names of all 4 teachers and he narrates it, and he makes it seem as if this is how they all narrated it. So this point, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah is here quoting it from Ibn Salah rahimahullah, and Ibn Salah rahimahullah in turn took it from Allama Khatib rahimahullah. So you can see this is not something which Ibn Hajar is making up. In fact, at the end of this chapter, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah indicates to the book Al-Fasl Lil-Wasl of Allama Khatib rahimahullah. And in that very book, Al-Fasl Lil-Wasl, he mentions, وَمِنْهَا مَا كَانَ يَرْوِيهِ الْمُحَدِّثُ عَنْ جَمَاعَةٍ اشْتَرَكُوا فِي رِوَايَتِهِ فاتفقوا غير واحد منهم خالفهم في إسناده فأدرج الإسناد وحمل على الاتفاق. So he makes it seem as if all his teachers narrated it the same, whereas some teachers narrated it with one less rawi and others narrated ولا يبين الاختلاف. He doesn't explain that these are how the teachers differed. أما لو بينه فقال لفظ فلان كذا وزاد فلان كذا وحذف منه فلان كذا كما يفعله مسلم كثيرا لم يكن من إدراج الإسناد في شيء. If he has to explain the differences, like those of you who done Dora and read Sahih Muslim, Imam Muslim rahmallah frequently does this throughout his kitab, where he points out to the differences in the asanid, then that's not considered as idraj. So this is the first side. Mullah Ali Qari and Allama Munawi rahmallah, they presented the same example as Allama Ibn Salah rahimahullah. مثاله حديث الترمذي عن بندار عن ابن مهدي عن الثوري عن واصل ومنصور والأعمش عن أبي وائل عن عمرو بن شرحبيل عن عبد الله. So that's sanad. If you look at it, Sufyan Thawri had 3 teachers who narrated this hadith to him about the greatest son. So what are his 3 teachers' names? Wasil, Mansur and A'mash. These are 3 teachers of Sufyan Thawri. So 2 of his 3 teachers, Mansur and A'mash, they narrated, so the remaining portion of the sanad is like this here. So Mansur and A'mash narrating it from Abu Wa'il, and they are quoting Amr bin Shurahbil from Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu. Comes like this here also in Sahih al-Bukhari, although it dates from Jarir. So Jarir عن منصور عن أبي وائل عن عمرو بن شرحبيل عن عبد الله قال سألت النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يطن أعظم عند الله قال أن تجعل لله ندا وهو خلقك. So this narration you can see they added Mansur and A'mash, they added the narrator Amr bin Shurahbil. And also the narration of A'mash comes in Bukhari and Muslim. But then the third teacher of Sufyan, Wasil, when he transmitted it, he did not take the name of Amr bin Shurahbil. So Yahya bin Ma'in, he explained this here, and that's how it comes in Sahih al-Bukhari, with tahwil in the sanad, that Imam Bukhari narrated it, and after it he says, وَحَدَّثَنِي, so from Yahya bin Ma'in is saying, وَحَدَّثَنِي وَاسِلٌ عن أبي وائل عن عبد الله. So here is no Amr bin Shurahbil. Mansur and A'mash, they added Amr bin Shurahbil, but he did not add Amr bin Shurahbil. He's narrating that Wa'il quoted it directly from Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiyallahu anhum. So now when 2 students of Sufyan Thawri rahmallah to narrate it, then Sufyan Thawri rahmallah narrated it to them, and he took the name of all 3 teachers, and he did not highlight this difference. So the 2 teachers are narrating it with Amr in the middle, and 1 teacher is not taking the name of Amr. But when Sufyan Thawri is telling it to his 2 students, and this here is a big ikhtilaf, because Ibn Hajar rahmallah actually is of the view, and from Imam Darqutni rahmallah, that Sufyan Thawri is the one to be blamed, not his students. So when he is narrating it, then he just narrates it. He narrated it to them, and he took all 3 names. So if you have to look, Alama Khatib rahimahullah, he narrates it like this here, going which is all sanad to Abdul Rahman bin Mahdi, then it goes to Sufyan, and it goes then to Mansur and A'mash and Wasil. So it's Wasil al-Ahdab. So it goes then to Wasil, and then from him, an Abi Wa'il, an Amr ibn Shurahbil, an Abdullah. So, and then so you can see he took the name of Mansur and A'mash, and he mentioned, and he even took the name of Wasil, and he added the name of Amr bin Shurahbil. And this is how Imam Tirmidhi rahmallah also narrated it, that he quoted it from Muhammad bin Bashar, who narrated it from Abdurrahman bin Mahdi, and then to Sufyan, to Wasil, to Abi Wa'il, and then adding Amr bin Shurahbil. But in reality, Wasil did not add Amr bin Shurahbil. So that's basically Wasil, there is idraj in the sanad. فَرِوَايَةُ Wasil هذه مدرجة على رواية منصور والأعمش لأن واصلا لم يذكر فيه عمرا بل رواه عن أبي وائل عن عبد الله وإنما ذكروا فيه منصور والأعمش فوافق روايته بروايتهما وقد بين الإسنادين معا يحيى بن القطان. And in another place, Imam Bukhari rahmallah also then quotes Yahya again saying that وحدثنا سفيان قال حدثني واصل عن أبي وائل عن أبي عبد الله. So basically it's a very simple example you can understand. The 2 students didn't add and the 1 student did add. And now when you will find many times that you will have narrations where some narrate it marfu'an, others narrate it mawqufan, then all of these also can fall into this very same category. So like we mentioned about Imam Muslim rahimahullah, that in order to save themselves from this type of idraj, muhaddithun would make tahwil in the sanad. And this here happens very frequent in the books. You can just see how Imam Bukhari rahimahullah narrated it from Yahya with the tahwil in the sanad. So if they make tahwil in the sanad, in fact, when you're narrating hadith, so when you done Dara, or those of you who are going to do Dara, Ḥadīth, then you read وَبِهِ قَالَ حَدَّثَنَا. So what's the meaning of وَبِهِ? وَبِالسَّنَدِ الْمُتَّصِلِ مِنَّا إِلَى الْإِمَامِ الْبُخَارِ. So if just say, assuming maybe one of the teachers, one of your asatidah were not present for a particular, maybe say they were absent one of days. So then it also falls under the same thing, because now it's in that particular narration, there is no more ittisal because your ustad wasn't there. So that's the one type of idraj. The second type is يكون المتن عند راو أي بإسناد واحد إلا طرفا منه فإنه عنده بإسناد آخر ويرويه راو عنه تاما بالإسناد الأول. So here the person hears, it's a lengthy narration, and the narrator has bulk of the narration from a particular sanad. But then there's this one small portion which he doesn't have. So maybe say like one sentence or maybe a very small portion. So he has it with a different sanad. But when he narrates it, he incorporates that additional sentence which is narrating with the other sanad here as well. So you can understand that he's adding that narration into this narration, and he's incorporating it. So again, Mullah al-Qari brings the same example as Allama ibn Salah rahimahullah, and we'll just explain the example which they presented, although we do not really agree with this. And this is the thing that scholars would differ a lot on what words were mudraj, or whether words were mudraj or whether they were not mudraj, or whether there was idraj of a rawi in the sanad or not. If you read Fathul Bari, you'll see how many times Ibn Hajar rahimahullah said fihi nadarun. He makes ta'aqqub on those who suggested that a particular sanad had idraj in it, and even in the matan. So it's always even in this example here, those of you who done Muqaddimah ibn Salah, you can refer to lesson 159. We had a detailed discussion there. Inshallah, when we put the notes, we put a link again of that lesson. So why we don't agree with it, but nevertheless they're presenting it here as an example. So we just quote the same example. And if you want different examples, Sheikh Ibrahim al-Laqim in his commentary, he gave lots of different examples. So in this example, you have a narrator. His name is Asim. Now Asim has 3 students: Zaida, Sharik, and Sufyan bin Uyayna. So like our Asatiza used to tell us that if you have a strong mind, you'll be able to visualize all this. You'll be able to make a mental map, visual picture in your mind, and in fact you'll be able to follow. So when talking about asanid, it's like only you have to have a very strong mind to be able to follow without. But if you can't make it in your mind, then you can make it on a paper. So you put the Asim and you put 3 students of his: Zaida, Sharik, and Sufyan bin Uyayna. So all of them narrate the hadith wherein he says that what the additional words that ثُمَّ جِئْتُ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ, on رَفْعُ الْيَدَيْن. So he's saying that, explaining how Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam raised their hands, and then the additional words ثُمَّ جِئْتُ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ فِي زَمَانِ بَرْدٍ شَدِيدٍ فَرَأَيْتُ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهِمْ جُلُّ الثِّيَابِ, obviously different wording, تَحَرَّكَ أَيْدِيهِمْ تَحْتَ الثِّيَابِ. So Mullah al-Qari quotes here and he says, قال موسى بن هارون وذلك عندنا وهم. With this additional portion, ثم جئت بعد ذلك, it's actually there's idraj here. ليس هو بهذا الإسناد. It doesn't come with this exact same sanad. Rather it comes إنما هو أدرج عليه عن عاصم عن عبد الجبار بن وائل عن بعض أهله. So you can see when it's عن بعض أهله, then there's جهالة there, عن وائل. So in this way, there's a portion of this of the matan which was narrated via another tariq, and the bulk of the narration is via one tariq, and the narrator does not make any distinction. وَمِنْهُ أَن يَسْمَعَ الْحَدِيث مِنْ شَيْخِهِ. Sometimes it could be that additional part is not from a completely different sanad. It could be just that maybe he heard the majority from his sheikh, but that small portion he didn't hear it directly from his sheikh. He heard it indirectly. Maybe there was another student, and that student narrated it to him. So, إِلَّا طَرَفًا مِنْهُ فَيَسْمَعُ عَنْ شَيْخِهِ بِوَاسِطَةٍ. He hears it from someone else who quotes it from his sheikh. So you can see from his sheikh until Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the isnad again is the same. So here, al-Azhar يقول يدل is that it would have been more apparent for Ibn Hajar rahimahullah to say فَيَسْمَعُهُ عَمَّنْ سَمِعَهُ مِنْ شَيْخِهِ, rather than to say that فَيَسْمَعُهُ عَنْ شَيْخِهِ بِوَاسِطَةٍ. Obviously that's just a small thing on the ibarah. So you can see the second point, he made it like a point B of the second type, so it's not totally different. Basically, it could be somewhere in the sanad. So the sanad is the same, and maybe the sanad diverted a little. So it started the same, it diverted a little, and then came back to the same sahabi. Or maybe it could be that right in the beginning, that someone else narrated from the sheikh, so that there is a second type of idraj. The third type of idraj is أن يكون عند الراوي متنان مختلفان بإسنادين مختلفين. That there's two totally different matan texts which comes with absolutely different chains, and he makes it seem that فيرويهما راو عنه مقتصرا على أحد الإسنادين. He quotes only one sanad and he narrates both chains. So it could be from the same sahabi, or it could be from a different sahabi. إما عن صحابيين أو عن واحد فقط. And again, Mullah al-Qari gives the example of Ibn Salah rahimahullah. So basically, in this particular narration, it's the hadith that لا تباغضوا ولا تحاسدوا ولا تدابروا ولا تنافسوا. So the one chain, if you can remember it goes Malik, who's narrating from Abu Zinad, who's narrating from A'raj, who's narrating from Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu. So you can see the sahabi differs. It's a completely different chain. But then with a different chain, you have Imam Malik rahmallah narrating a very similar narration, and the words La Tanafasu are excluded. The words La Tanafasu are not mentioned. So that chain goes like this here. Malik an Zuhri an Anas. Can you see how it's so different? There it was Malik an Abi Zinad, here it's Malik an Zuhri. That here the additional Rawi A'raj, and that was from Abu Huraira, and this one is from Anas radiyallahu anhu. So in here, the words La Tanafasu are not mentioned. And this is how it comes in Muwatta of Malik and also in Sahih al-Bukhari. So now, you have these two reports, one with a different chain where La Tanafasu is mentioned and one where it's not mentioned. What happens is that Alama Khatib and Ibn Abdul Barr, they bring a sanad which goes via Hamza bin Muhammad and links to Sa'id bin Abi Maryam. And he adds the words of the one narration into the other. So he makes it seem as it was all narrated with the one chain. And this year, remember, Sa'id bin Abi Maryam is extremely reliable. Thiqatun, tabtun, faqihun. He was the teacher of Imam Bukhari, even in his Sahih. Imam Bukhari rahmallah narrates so many times from him. So you can see how even a strong narrator would do this. That he first quoted the narration from Imam Malik, and he only mentions the one sanad. He doesn't bring the other sanad. And he makes it seem that it was narrated with the additional words, La Tanafasu. Then the fourth time is يسوق الإسناد فيعرض له عارض فيقول كلاما من قبل نفسه ويظن بعض من سمعه أن ذلك الكلام هو متن ذلك الإسناد فيرويه عنه كذلك. So here what happens is the muhaddith quotes the whole sanad, and he's about to mention the text of the hadith, but then he becomes distracted. So now he mentions something else. So the audience, what do they think? They assume that probably that's what he was going to what he mentioned after quoting the sanad, this is the narration. Meantime, that's not the narration. He quoted the whole sanad and he was about to narrate the narration. So the example, it's a very famous example which is given, and everyone gives the same example, is that Sharik and Thabit bin Mūsa as Zahid. So Sharik once mentioned the sanad, and he was about to mention the narration. And Thabit bin Mūsa, a very pious person, although weak in hadith, he entered. So when Sharik saw him, now he saw the nur on his face and he saw the radiance. So instead of quoting the hadith, he said, "Man kathurat salatuhu bil layl, hasuna wajhuhu bin nahar." He's saying that person who makes a lot of salah at night, his face is beautified during the day. So what happened is Thabit and even others, they assume that is actually the narration. Meantime, that wasn't a narration, it was a comment. That he's commenting, he quoted the whole sanad and he was about to mention a totally different hadith. But because he mentioned the siyah, so now they assume that this is actually what he was going to mention. هذه أقسام مدرج الإسناد. So these are the various types of مدرج الإسناد. 4 types, and Now, in next lesson, inshallah, we'll go through Mudrajul Matn. So until Thursday, Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.